Hello and welcome to the Political Opinions podcast, where every opinion is given equal footing and political tolerance and debate are given their proper attention in a world where both are on the decline. Today's episode will cover different opinions on capital punishment. More commonly known as the death penalty, capital punishment has been used by humans for millennia as a way to deal with those who commit the worst crimes in society. Be it treason, murder, or something else horrendously bad, there have always been those who believe killing the offender is the best solution. And with an increased use of prisons and incarceration in modern society, people today continue to advocate for its use. As always, however, there are those who argue that capital punishment is wrong for a multitude of reasons. Today, we will unpick and compare these opinions. To begin with, it is worth assessing the value of human life. To those who support capital punishment, they may argue that a human life is not so valuable that we should not execute people. We will come on to why in a second, but to begin with, to be in favour of the death penalty, individuals must believe that a human life is not completely invaluable. Firstly, a commonly advocated reason for capital punishment is that it does not breach human rights. Essentially, to some, if you kill a person and violate their right to live, then you have violated your own human right to life. This therefore assumes that human rights are contingent on people abiding by them. Then, just as killing someone breaches your own human rights, so too should the punishment fit the crime. If you murder someone, some believe that you too should die in retribution for what you have done. And then, given capital punishment is the worst sentence a person can receive, some believe that reserving it for the worst crimes will deter people from committing them. Furthermore, executing criminals is the most effective way, to be honest, to ensure that they cannot ever re-offend on the basis that they're dead. Then, as with any punishment, there is a risk that the wrong person could be sentenced. However, the chances of this happening are very low, and as such, some argue that the benefits outweigh the costs. Furthermore, if an innocent person is sentenced to life in prison or sentenced to death, superficially at least, there isn't much difference. This idea that there is little difference between being executed and spending the rest of your life in prison can also extend to cost. It is cheaper to execute criminals after a set period of time than keep them in prison for the rest of their life. And then finally, some argue that through advances in technology, the actual execution is done in as humane a way as possible. There is often very little pain involved if done right. And then on the flip side, some argue that these people don't even deserve an ethical death to begin with, so the way we do commit capital punishment is, somewhat at least, lenient. On the inverse, for those who don't support capital punishment, they believe that the human life is simply too valuable, that it cannot be taken away for any reason. Even if someone commits murder, or something else very bad, some believe that we cannot take a human life because it is too valuable to begin with. Some people also oppose capital punishment because it breaches human rights. There are those who believe that just because you have violated someone else's human right does not mean that your human rights are void. These people believe in not supposedly stooping down to the level of the murderer and taking their life as well. And this point extends to that of retribution. Essentially, there is a belief that you cannot fight fire with fire, and killing murderers is not the best way to approach the situation. There is a general belief that retribution is wrong and should not be the goal of society when it comes to dealing with criminals. There is also a view that those who commit crimes worthy of capital punishment simply don't care about their actions. If you're committing murder, you're likely not worried about being sent to prison for a long time as a result. Therefore, some people claim that it is not an effective deterrent. They will continue to commit these crimes regardless, and there is no deterrent in being executed. Furthermore, empirically, the fact that murders still happen is proof alone that capital punishment does not work, at least all of the time. Furthermore, some argue that the risk of executing the wrong person is too great for capital punishment to ever be used. Even killing one innocent person is bad enough to mean that the practice should not be used, given it can't be undone. Then, although there is a little superficial difference between being incarcerated for the rest of your life and being executed, that does not mean that we should use money as a way to value people's lives. Regardless of whether or not it is cheaper to kill someone, people believe that you cannot deal with human life in terms of monetary value, and that cost alone is not enough to justify taking a life. And then finally, some argue that there is no ethical way to kill someone. It is commonly recorded that criminals about to be executed suffer extreme anxiety and fear, and there are many cases of lethal injections, firing squads, and electrocutions being botched, and the actual execution causing pain. Moving on to the comparison. Firstly, on the value of human life. Well, those supporting capital punishment argue that human life is not so valuable that we cannot have executions, and they point to the positive effects of capital punishment which trump the value of human life. However, those disagreeing argue that human life is invaluable, and we cannot take it away for any reason, and no crime is so bad that a life becomes worthless. Then, on this whole issue of human rights. For those supporting capital punishment, they would argue that if you breach someone's human rights, you lose yours too. Human rights are contingent upon people abiding by them. However, those disagreeing would say human rights are not contingent on anything, and that no matter what someone does, their human right to live exists forever. Then on the question of does this work as a punishment? Well, those supporting capital punishment, surprisingly, argue that the punishment should match the crime, and we should pursue retribution. Essentially, if you kill someone, you too should be killed. However, those disagreeing argue that retribution is wrong, and we should not pursue it. We should not fight fire with fire and lower our standards to that of the convicted. Then on this question of is it an effective deterrent? Those supporting capital punishment argue that it is the ultimate deterrent for crimes, and that executed criminals can never re-offend. However, those disagreeing would say capital punishment does not work as a form of deterrent, and people who commit murder simply don't care about the consequences. Then, on the risk of killing the wrong person, those supporting the death penalty argue there is a very low risk of killing the wrong person, and the issue isn't with the punishment inflicted, but with the court and the processing of all of that. It's not so much how someone who's already been convicted is dealt with, but rather whether they are convicted to begin with. Well, those disagreeing would argue that there should never ever be a risk of killing the wrong person. Executions cannot be reversed. Unlike people who are sentenced to long times in prison when they are innocent, they can be released, but if they've been executed, there's no coming back from that. Then on this question of cost, those supporting capital punishment argue that it is cheaper to kill someone than incarcerate them forever, and there is no intrinsic difference between the two punishments. However, those disagreeing would say that human lives should never be in any way associated with money, and the cost will never match up to someone's right to live. And finally, on this question of ethical killings, those supporting capital punishment argue that modern technology means executions can be carried out painlessly. These people don't deserve ethical deaths to begin with, and the fact that they are getting one is more than they deserve. However, those disagreeing would say that there is no ethical way to kill people. There is always pain involved in some way, be it psychological or physical, and the whole idea of an ethical death is done to justify something which shouldn't exist to begin with. Overall then, those who support capital punishment believe it is an appropriate response to the worst crimes committed by people. However, those who oppose it believe that we should never drop down to the level of a criminal, and should instead work to maintain everyone's right to life. Capital punishment has had periods of increased and decreased support. The current rise in populism has meant that some are more in favour of capital punishment. For example, there have been increased uses recently in the USA. It is hard to gauge what will happen in the future, for it depends upon many factors, such as societal trends, methods of execution, and more. Ultimately though, what do you think? Do you believe capital punishment should or should not be used? And do you think that certain crimes warrant its use more than others? Also, is there anything that I missed, got wrong, or could do better? Let me know in the comments or on Twitter. As always, the aim of this episode has been not to try and argue for or against one side of the debate, but rather to highlight the different opinions on the topic and provide a comparison between them. Be sure to check back on Monday for another episode. Thank you for listening, and I hope to see you all soon.